No kid's Jewish education should end at 13. Adraba offers Ontario high school credits infused with Jewish learning online for teens across the province. Ministry approved, intellectually demanding, Jewishly transformative. Adraba.ca. Your teen belongs here.
We are back, and so much has happened since we've last chatted. First on our minds, though, is a case of vandalism at a Winnipeg synagogue. How should we react towards these situations? Are these incidents similar to the tragedy at Bondi Beach? Are there alternatives that we can explore? All this plus a faith-based partnership to potentially end homelessness in Canada. And textual healing, of course. I'm Avi Finegold, and along with Yedida Eisenstat and Matthew Leibl, we are not in heaven. Oh my goodness, it feels like it's been forever.
It has been.
I don't even remember what you guys look like. There's this strange guy with a beard in my screen.
It's an audio-only podcast. Don't give away my face. I'm in the off season. I'm growing it out.
That's not just any beard.
I feel like David Letterman after he left TV. Yeah. How have you been? We've had Hanukkah. We've had Christmas. Did you go to a movie on Christmas like I did with my family? I don't know if you guys do Chinese food, but
we road tripped to Toronto. 8+ hours in the car with 3 kids, 6 and under. Was a great joy round trip without snow tires. No, we had a great time. We were in Toronto. We came up for my father's 70th birthday. Happy birthday, Abba.
Mazel tov.
And I believe that his birthday party was on December 25th. So that, I guess, is how we spent that day. And then I think we just ate leftovers. So there was no Chinese in a movie in my life. It didn't even occur to me. It wasn't even on my radar. I will say that I kind of want to go see the David movie.
I've heard from somebody that it's worth seeing. We saw Zootopia 2 on Christmas, which was my family's tradition growing up. Chinese food with on Christmas Eve, and then a movie on the actual day. And we got to do that this year because usually we go with my wife's family. My wife converted. So we go and celebrate Christmas with them on a usual basis for the regular basis the last 20 years. But this year we all did a warm weather holiday when you guys were doing that last podcast episode. I was away. And so we kind of got to skip Christmas, which was weird, but we got to go do that. But we didn't see the David movie. And I've heard there's good music in it. And I've heard that it's worthwhile.
David, are you ready to be the next king?
What? No.
No?
Don't mess this up for me, David. I get to be a princess.
I'm just a shepherd. We already have a king.
Bring out Goliath!
He's huge.
It is out of a Christian studio. Just to make it super clear, like Christianity's interest in David is as a ancestor of Jesus. And if Jesus is a descendant of David, then he is a legitimate king of Israel, et cetera, et cetera. So this is like a cartoon movie of his life. And it is educational. And it's one of those texts that we share with Christians. The reviews that I've heard from similarly minded Jewish parents are that it's a fun movie and there's sort of minimal Christological symbolism with one major exception. But that even in that case, it's like subtle enough that my little kids aren't going to pick it up and only I will get a little squirmy. So I'm interested.
Is it in the Prince of Egypt category?
Yeah,
is
except
it in
Christian.
Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat kind of world?
I think so.
Huh.
I remember about 15 years ago, I think, there was this TV series called Kings. They took the David story and they modernized it. And it's in a modern day format with modern architecture, and war is going on with actual like tanks and stuff. But there's clearly a David and there's clearly a king named Saul.
You thought you saved my life when I was taken hostage, but you destroyed it. You loved me. I loved him. I cut him out of my heart. There's always a choice. There's nothing left for me.
Well, he killed himself this morning.
But to die. And I'm the only person.
No!
who really saw me and still loved me. He's dead.
It's not even like trying to pretend that it's thinly veiled. It is that, but brought into the modern idiom. And I thought it was kind of cool. I even owned it on DVD because I thought I would never get to see it again. And I found a way to buy it.
Yeah, no, I'm always interested in that kind of thing. And I used to have fun teaching it, right? There's tons of literature also written out of biblical stories, and it's midrashic.
I, for one, I think went to sleep bright and early on Christmas Eve because we woke up early on Christmas Day and we made our way to Miami for a week. People in Miami are remarkably smug about the weather. They're like, "You're from Canada? Oh, must be so nice to be here." And I'm like, yeah, like you had something to do with creating this weather. Like you just live here. Just get over it.
I don't know that that's I don't know that that's unique to Miami. I think that's anyone in North America who lives in that southern part where it's warm. Though right now, as we tape today, it's a balmy 1 degree Celsius in Winnipeg in the middle of January, which is unheard of. We had a crazy warm November, a crazy cold December, climate change all over the place. Tu B'Shvat's a few weeks away. It's nuts.
Yeah. But Matthew, there's so much stuff happening in Winnipeg these days. And I'm not talking about the Grand Slam of curling, which just ended in Steinbach, Manitoba, which I was watching avidly.
Were you?
Not, of course.
As one does.
I didn't realize you were a big curling fan, but yeah.
Well, I curl anyways, but yeah.
I wanted you to share the thing that you were involved in first at Winnipeg, and then we can talk about some, because I don't know if a lot of people have heard of this. They've heard of some of the other headlines.
Yeah. There's this really interesting organization called Relevant, and their main thing is working with real estate and the church, repurposing real estate and like unused churches into better use for the community, things that are for profit, but allow the community to still have their church whenever they need it, whether it's for profit, whether it's not for profit. They have lots of different use cases that they've been able to work with churches and other religious spaces to be able to give them back to the community. And they have this Winnipeg Declaration that is going to be launched this week that they asked me to be part of. And I'm not just talking about this because they asked me to be a part of it. I think it's actually a really cool thing where they are asking religious people of all different faiths to be able to come together to end homelessness in Canada by using the land and other resources that faith organizations have to be able to use them in short-term housing ways and longer-term housing ways, and to rethink what we can do with these spaces to be able to end homelessness in Canada, because there is so much real estate that is not being used by faith communities, and we need to be able to do better with that.
I think it's a really cool idea. So good on you and all the people who are involved in that. And I hope it goes well.
Does this represent a failure of government?
I mean, yes and no. I think that to be fair to government, they're always relying on private partnerships or other faith-based partnerships to be able to pick up the slack, right? One can say that anything that the church does for good is a failure of government because the government should be able to do that. And then there's the small government people that say government should do none of it and let the faith communities do all of that. And it's a failure of the faith communities to know that they have all these resources and they're not using it.
Right. I'd meet you halfway on that. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great that there's a faith-based initiative to work towards, I think ending is a big goal, but, trying to house people and offer them the services that they need. It's interesting to me that it's coming through a faith-based space. I didn't see, is the government involved in any way?
I'm sure that they're asking the government to work with this. And I think one of the ways that is important for the government to be part of it is if a church gives up a building, there's a lot of really complicated tax-related issues that have come up because this was something that was paid for with tax dollars or with nonprofit, status and all of that stuff. And the ability to reuse it for housing does raise tax issues. And I think that they are asking the government for the ways in which this can actually benefit, because I don't think that most shoals are going to right away become homeless shelters. And I think that that's not necessarily the best use of shoals, especially some shoals are still being used. And it's not like churches, which used to be able to host, 500 people and are now hosting 40 people. And there needs to be a massive reuse of the space. I think shoals have a very time-based underuse, overuse, utilization. And I think it really depends on every individual use of the resource. I can imagine that some shuls might become homeless shelters. I imagine that some shuls might become, if they are amenable to it, might become day centers for homeless people to give them, a place to be and resources to move themselves forward in society.
It sounded like this initiative specifically is using places that really are otherwise not used.
So that's what I'm saying, is that the Jewish community doesn't have nearly as many of those. And when they do, I think that those are real opportunities. There was a case in Montreal where a shul closed, and I really believe that they probably could have taken that money and that they sold and turned the building into something huge. It went to a condo, but it could have been low-cost housing.
I'm excited to see whether this is a success. I'm sure that there will be metrics and studies. I'd be interested to learn a lot more about the services and supports being offered in these spaces, because I think the best investment in unhoused people is helping them get on their feet. I also think it bears pointing out that synagogues have different kinds of security concerns than most churches do.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we will talk about Jackson, Mississippi at some point, but, a 19-year-old broke a window and got in and set the place on fire. So it's a different kinds of concerns.
Let's move on to that right after we hear from a sponsor. Matthew, you are the one that is living in Winnipeg. You are the one that is closest to probably Congregation Shaarei Tzedek. I believe you have many years of your life were devoted to really making that place what it is now. Can you fill in for us what has happened over the past couple of weeks and what the community response has been?
Did spend, a long time there. And I was a rabbi there for a week and a half ago now. I think early part of January, there was someone graffitied swastikas on the front doors. They've got these beautiful front doors, Tribes of Israel kind of thing, like a lot of shuls do, and someone swastikaed that. They've arrested somebody connected with this graffiti and a whole bunch of other graffiti, like he's a serial graffiti artist. And I think there might have been on a nearby high school, not the Jewish high school, but a high school in the neighborhood. When we were chatting, you can attest to this, my first instinct was that this was a singular person who probably had some mental health issues, but this was not some kind of organized terrorist act. I would say that for me, for anyone I've talked to, I haven't sent, again, I'm not involved with the shul, and I haven't been for a while, but I, as a community member and a rabbi working in Winnipeg, this didn't really have any impact on me in terms of Winnipeg as a safe or not safe place to be. I just think it just so happens that this one person, you know what I'm saying? I didn't see this as Bondi Beach and this are to me miles apart. Miles apart in the things that strike fear to me as a Jew, as a rabbi in my hometown.
I've done a lot of thinking about this. And also I've been listening to the What Is Happening Here podcast. I think I'm in episode 3 or 4. And a distinction that one of the people that host makes, I think is relevant here, but I want to take it a little bit further. The distinction is acts that are meant to harass and intimidate and scare and terrorize, and acts that are intended to maim, right? So it's terrible that a shul in Jackson, Mississippi, big parts of it were burnt down, but it was done in the middle of the night when people were not there, right? Shooting at a school in the middle of the night is meant to terrorize and intimidate, and that's terrible, and it's scary. I am scared. But it's different than opening fire on a huge crowd of human beings. But opening fire on the huge crowd of human beings is designed to kill people and also terrorize and scare and intimidate. So there's Venn diagrams here. And I'm not minimizing this, but I'm trying to make sense of our feelings of being scared. And there definitely are many more of these events happening with greater frequency everywhere. But as Matthew points out, they're not, as far as we can tell, organized, right? So I respond differently to an individual person doing a crazy thing for any number of reasons, including mental illness, as opposed to like government organized, approved acts against Jews, right? Like those are miles apart and there's lots of space in between. But I'm right. A person who prioritizes terrorizing and intimidating and killing Jews more than they do their own freedom for living the rest of their life, like that is a weird choice to make.
Yeah.
It's not like a well thought out choice. And so I'm wondering about, what the other factors and considerations in each of these instances are, while also noting that like this is scary and it is happening more and more often.
Yeah. So look, I mean, I guess the question that I would have to be able to get into that line of thinking is, Matthew, first of all, what has the communal response been? Both at the official level of like the organized community and the person-to-person interactions that people have been having and talking about this.
Police were swift, took care of it, lots of updates. I think there was progress, and the fact that they found somebody, I mean, that's all that shows organization and taking it very seriously. That's a big part of it. And then what I've been hearing is that the outpouring of support from not just Jews, but non-Jews throughout the city, religious communities, has been overwhelming. And to tell you the truth, that is exactly what I would have expected. And that's why it hasn't affected me. It's, if anything, to me, there's one guy here who did, I don't even know what to call it, but on his own,
and
a
not
lone
just
person,
directed
the
at Jews.
communal response. Right. Yeah, exactly. And to me, that guy would have spray painted swastikas in any year. Like, to me, that doesn't feel like it has anything, like, it doesn't feel like a post-October 7th sort of thing, the way the Bondi Beach does, right? And so the response in Winnipeg has been, people went out to shul, they had politicians, they had people from the community, had people from other religious groups. They all showed out great support, letters from the premier, letters from the mayor, all of the right things, but all of the things that if they didn't come, it would be very concerning. And so they come, and they come right away. And it's great. I'll say it today, as I've said it, being a Jew in Winnipeg, still, to me, super safe, not a question. It's just a real shame that this happens, right? It's always just such a sad shame that this person who's going on a graffiti rampage through a few neighborhoods, that he's including, hate symbols. He could have easily not. Like, I liked what you were kind of saying there, Yedida. It's in a different, it terrorizes and it scares to a certain degree, but not in a way that made me go, whoa, like Australia or something.
My question really then is whether the community response is appropriate and what possibly could be done otherwise, right? Let's look at Winnipeg and Bondi separately, because like we said, they're completely separate things, right? On the one hand, yes, I agree that the Jewish community, especially the established organizations, are at a really tough spot, because if you underreact, right, and then a month later something massive happens, it's horrible. It is catastrophic for the community. You have mishandled the situation. It is not good. Staff is going to get fired. Lots of stuff, bad stuff is going to happen. And it's really not good for the community to be able to say that we didn't think about this and then it happened. On the other hand, right, if every single time you overreact strongly, right, to a lone individual who has an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex and goes and just spray paints at a bunch of neighborhoods, and one of them happens to be a shul, right, and you say this is the worst thing ever, and you throw the book at this kid, like, or this individual, I don't know the age of the individual, to be fair.
30s, mid-30s. Yeah,
I'm not sure that that's the right approach either. So like, I get where they stand and I get that they're really in a tough spot, and there's an expectation. There's a total expectation that they are going to go and have a zero tolerance policy for this type of stuff. But what are the options and what are the alternatives and what are the downsides to having this sort of maximal reaction to some really small thing?
I mean, I think it needs to be established whether this is somebody who is mentally ill or this is somebody who sets out to terrorize and intimidate, and what are the practical differences between those two, right? Like, the practical differences in theory are like, what are the consequences?
Well, they're huge, the practical differences. And it's very obvious to tell what the practical differences are, because one takes planning and thought and isn't designed to just have this like quick strike and just move on and like, hey, this is fun, do it on a lark. And the other one actually shows that they're designed to not just harass and intimidate, but to cause like real damage. And that is not something that requires planning, that requires thinking, that requires real ill will for a prolonged amount of time to be able to say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to plan it out and I'm going to get my gun and I'm going to think about the right day to do it and the right place and the right angle. You're not just doing a rampage by like having it one day and just moving on.
Okay.
No, exactly. I'm trying to create the difference between the two and to say, on the one hand, this is a really like small thing, the graffiti, and then, you know, a murderous rampage on a beach at a Hanukkah event is very, very different and shows actual real serious
But that's also
malice.
why I'm trying to figure out like what the motivation of the graffiti person is. Right? Like it wasn't just
right. And I had read, to be fair,
like maybe it's hate directed at multiple groups, or it's like, I'm going to do this and let's see if
mental
they can catch
illness.
me and maybe I'm smarter than they are. Right? Like there's all right. The motivations and the considerations, I think, teach us something, but I also in every case is different.
So I guess the question is, how should the Jewish community react? How should the organizational Jewish community, how should the shul, how should the local federation frame this to give the Jewish community at large a way forward to think about this? Because right now, what I see is that there's this maximal approach to say, this is horrible, this is bad, we're going to throw the book at this kid or this person, and we're like, and I'm not sure that as you're pointing out, it's not necessarily the right response, but I don't know what the other options are.
As a Jewish organizational leader.
Yeah. Like if you're the head of federation in Winnipeg, do you go to the shul and say, hey, listen, let's just clean this up tomorrow and let's just ignore it because it's not, we caught the person and it has nothing to do with real anti-Semitism and we're just going to move on.
No. I think there needs to be a certain level of publicity within the public, of handling this and letting it known that this happened. From what I've read, the investigation is still going to determine if it's under the category of a hate crime or if it's just vandalism, and they're going to make the decision. But I think that you treat it publicly, you get the police involved, you get the people out there, and you send. This sounds weird saying, but you send a message to the graffiti artists that if you're gonna vandalize, you should know that if you start venturing into anti-Semitic symbols or other hate symbols, like there was a cafe that was targeted with Islamophobia. So like that's where it needs to be handled here. And the enforcing of the law is the key beyond the Jewish community. This isn't just vandalism anymore. And I get where you're going, Avi. It's like you can't, I don't think you lock them up for 20 years, but there does have to be a certain place in this country and a lot of countries where anything that's getting into hate crime has to be clearly identified, and they have to start making some examples through the punishment as a deterrent. Otherwise, I don't know how you're going to slow it down or change course, because it's clear the incidents are going up. Whatever the reason is, you could argue, but the incidents are going up. So they need to figure this out. We need to figure this out.
That seems to be the bottom line conclusion of the What Is Happening Here podcast, that like with those cases that are clearly, double standards and anti-Semitism, and there shouldn't be a second separate set of rules and standards that are applied when Jews are involved. That Canada and other places need to enforce their own laws, and not, be like, oh, but Israel, is doing that thing in Gaza.
Yeah. And I feel so torn, because I agree with you that like we have to clamp down on this, but I'm still stuck on what you guys are saying, which I agree with like 100%, that this is not somebody who has real malice towards the Jewish community. He may even believe in free Palestine and this is his like thing, but the leap from I have like some random anti-Semitic thought, but I'm also just going to throw some graffiti up on a wall, or I'm going to, I'm going to throw some graffiti up on a wall, or just otherwise commit some minor vandalism to a Jewish communal like institution. It doesn't feel like that's actually something that I need to really turn into something bigger and to prosecute it. The whole concept of restorative justice, like I feel like it needs to be brought up here, even though it's probably one of the most difficult things to really implement and to enact, right? To like get this kid to go and like realize, I keep thinking about these kids as teenagers, and they're not. Sometimes they're people in their 30s. To get this person to like come to shul and to meet all the people in the community and to like break down the walls so that people to see that. Yeah, in a way, in theory, that's a great program and it's a great, way of thinking about it, but it's a lot harder to implement that than to do throw the book at them and then hope that the next person, right, doesn't, commit the graffiti or the vandalism because they heard that the last guy went to jail, because that almost never happens, right? The things that I've learned from looking up this topic over the past, few days has been that the punishment almost never prevents the next thing from happening, and that the whole broken windows theory of crime, and in this case, the broken windows theory of anti-Semitism, I guess you could say, isn't actually true, right? The idea that there's all this anti-Semitic graffiti going up, and therefore the next thing that's going to happen is a Bondi Beach style massacre, that isn't necessarily true. And other things need to happen in order to prevent the big things, and they are usually unrelated to the little things.
So yeah, what I was going to say is I think that people act irrationally when feelings are involved, and Jews do feel threatened. And so real leadership now is staying calm and looking at the data and speaking honestly to the community and saying, let's see what the investigation yields. And in order to be able to do that, there has to be a real relationship of trust between law enforcement and the Jewish leadership, that law enforcement is going to be honest about XYZ. And it seems to me that there's some breakdown of that trust happening right now in Canada and also in the US. And I think that's where things get especially scary. And I think, Matthew, the way that you've described and what we've read in the CJN about how law enforcement has led here has sustained and built trust between these two communities. And the question of how do we respond? I think that we have to just keep being Jewish and living our values. And I think that where Jews can lead and partner with other people of faith to do good and embrace, right? Like Matthew, you said that other faith communities have sort of embraced the Jewish community in this moment. And I think that we need to hug back. Right? I mean, historically, we know that Jews build relationships with government leaders, kings, people in power. But it's also really important to build those horizontal relationships with other faith communities and other people seeking social justice. And we need to do all of those things. So part of this is in response to a particular incident, but also how we enrich ourselves as Jews in the wake of this. We also have to keep engaging and doing the things that make us Jewish. And I think that we just have to keep being.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the fighting negative messages with positive messages is one of the strongest and most important things that we possibly can do. I found there was several stories of the past few years where, pride crosswalks and LGBTQ messagings in various cities in Canada, in Vancouver, I found what ended up happening as a result of that was that the messages were taken down completely, all the negative anti, gay all the homophobic messaging, and was replaced with great messages of love. And we love everybody, and love is great, and love's going to win. And putting that out there as something that was worthwhile actually, I think, is the nicest thing we can possibly do. Get out there and show people what we do as Jews, and we're doing good things. We care about people. We have great ideas. Putting that out there in the world to the point where if somebody spray paints some graffiti that is negative against the Jewish community and people are like, why would you say that? The Jews are nice people. We're good people. They haven't done anything wrong, right? That's the message that I want to get the rest of the greater community to see. And I'm happy for that to happen, instead of just, this is evil, we have to fight it and we have to get going. But I love that message, Yedida, of just putting ourselves out there as a Jewish community as much as we possibly can.
How did Bondi affect you guys in your Hanukkah? And because that's different, right? That's a whole different kind of conversation.
For the first time ever, I have never before worn a Magen David. And for Hanukkah, I went out and got myself one. So wow. I am identifiably Jewish anyway, but I'm wearing it around my neck now. Yeah.
Ever since?
That's why that helped me figure out what I wanted for Hanukkah. But it's not just about jewelry, obviously. That feels a little shallow, but the symbolism of outwardly identifying in an unmistakable way for me feels significant. I go back and forth between, oh my God, how is this happening? And why did we think it would not happen? Like, how naive is that? So I sort of go back and forth between those two pools. One thought that I've been having particularly about this is I think culturally, you guys might have more to say about this, but culturally, Canada and Australia are pretty similar. So that,
Sure.
right, like I live in these crazy United States now, and all of the crazy here is somewhat different than I think what's happening in Australia and Canada. But per my read, I think that there's a lot of similarities, both culturally and also with respect, rising anti-Semitism since October 7th. And so, yeah, we came to Canada a few days later. So that's sort of what I was thinking about. I was thinking about like, it was almost like it happened in Canada for like in my head.
I mean, I was horrified by it in every way that I think is fair and expected and should and was not good. But I keep thinking to myself, like, there is very little that one can do to prevent those types of attacks. And what can be done is already being done. So there are plenty of those types of attacks that have been prevented. We don't even know about them, which I think is actually for the good of the community. I don't think that we need this full transparency to say, you see, I want you guys to know that there was an attack planned on this shul in, Calgary, and we prevented it because of our, wonderful security network, and you should thank us. I don't think we need to do that. But I also know that at some point, there is limits to what we can do to prevent things from happening. And so if something's going to happen to me, it's going to happen to me. I don't think that me doing anything different is actually going to prevent that. And I think that to the contrary, if I'm going to not go and do something Jewish because I'm afraid of that happening to me, I actually think that I am worse off as a person and as a Jew than if I went to that event like that and I got injured, God forbid, or something worse happened to me. I think that I would be able to at least have my memory be dignified and to be able to say he lived his life for the rest of his life in fear.
Yeah, I usually take that approach too. It was interesting because that happened on the Sunday, right? It happened on the weekend, and then on the Monday, the very first day of the week of the working week, I was in my son's school where they have the public school, the elementary school, but the Hebrew bilingual program, and they had we had done a Shabbat together on Friday before, and it had gone really well, and they wanted me to come back and do Hanukkah stuff. And it was in the morning, and you've got grade 1 to grade 6. And one of the older class teachers asked me if I was going to say something about Bondi Beach, which I really wasn't planning, because my opinion was the older kids they'll talk about it in their rooms. I don't have a BED. I don't profess to be a teacher. I have got like good instincts in these situations that are honed fine, but it wasn't part of the plan. Like, this was supposed to be Hanukkah centric, and I think I could do that. But then a teacher kind of put me in the spot in front of everybody. So I found myself trying to discuss this. And then subsequently, my son Hugo, who's in grade 1, asking me questions after the fact, because that night we had our big Hanukkah program at Simkin Center at our Jewish personal care home where I work, right? And I had to talk about it there too.
Had you told him about it? Did he know about it?
Yeah, well, not before that moment. So it was very difficult in this particular situation trying to talk about this. And then when he followed up, well, I try to be careful with the verbs and be graphic. I don't want to mislead, but it's like Avi just said, you don't need to tell the whole truth to tell the truth. Right? Like, that's always a very important lesson. Like, I'm not saying about the way, the words you use, like you're talking to a kid. So I'm trying to describe that somebody did something very terrible and that people did die. And then he asked the questions that he asked me, just like they hit you, right? Did anyone young die? Did anyone die who was a kid? Well, yeah, someone who was 10 died. And could this sort of thing happen here? These are his questions, right? And my answer to the last question, I said to him, I'm not going to let it happen here. And I do believe that. I do believe that the work that we do in our communities, the work I do here, that it's like Avi just said, trying like the win for the good is a slow crawling day by day incremental win of doing good after good after good after good to try and erase these moments where hate can destroy it in a second. But as I'm telling him this, I'm also thinking to myself, like Avi said, if someone really wanted to do something super bad, I can't stop it. You can't stop it. No amount of greater good can stop it in that moment. And telling him that, but not telling him the last part, whew. I will tell you though what my final thing was at the personal care home and for the school was about the guy who rushed in and tackled the guy and put his life on the line. A Muslim, no less. Like he's the hero of the story. And that I think is very, very important to be part of the retelling too, is that yes, there was this terrible, but like with Hanukkah, the light. So that was where I tried to go with it, but we just haven't had a chance to debrief, I guess. And that was a low moment. That was a terrible, terrible. It felt like it put a pall over Hanukkah no matter what. Like we tried our best, but it put just like this dark cloud over Hanukkah that was just so unfair.
Well, speaking of doing good and thinking good, let's move on to our textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Yeah, the Parsha's Va'era, second Parsha into the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, which I believe is my favorite book of the Torah. I don't think we've had a chance to debate Exodus yet. But the gist is that the drama, the plot thickens quickly here. Moses and Aaron meet with Pharaoh, and I think the first 7 plagues, there's some wonders and signs, and then there's 7 plagues. It is rapid fire with the action and the drama and the well-known story of the plagues for the Israelites in Egypt as they try and get out of there. My quick little nugget, I was file this under the, that's kind of interesting. When Moses at the beginning of the Parsha tells God he doesn't want to go talk to Pharaoh, he's always trying to get out of it. He talks about himself having a speech impediment, right? But the expression in Hebrew is often not literally translated. It's an idiom. It's arel sfatayim, right? And if you did that literally, uncircumcised lips, satayim or lips, but arel, this is the same word used for somebody who's not circumcised throughout the Torah. And it always kind of made me go, uncircumcised lips. Interesting. There's also places where we're supposed to uncircumcise our heart, in places in Devarim, but we can get into that. But the thing that I always get drawn to every time I read this Parsha, the refrain of Pharaoh's heart hardening after each plague, right? And a couple of the times, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And there's this major concern from the reader. Wait a second. Would Pharaoh have let them go if not for God stepping in and hardening Pharaoh's heart? And rabbis have wondered about this. Rashi, Rambam, Ramban, all of them, Sforno, they all think about it. And I always kind of like the interpretation that Pharaoh, and the text supports it, that Pharaoh was hard of heart to begin with, and in sometimes maybe the fear of the plagues would have overcome how he truly felt, and so God just reinforced how God reinforced Pharaoh's true feelings so that he wasn't giving into the fear or the emotional reaction of the moment. Oh my God, there's hail coming down. Yes, let's send away the Hebrews. When in fact, the second the hail ended, Pharaoh revealed himself to be, refusing to lose, to doubling down. And I'm shocked by the number of people who double down when they are wrong, which is how I relate to Pharaoh and people in real life. Is they make a claim, and it's more about being right than getting it right, as I heard somebody say. They're not prepared to compromise. And we're just in this society now where there's so much divisiveness and new information that goes against what you may have thought. Instead of embracing it and wondering, maybe could I change my opinion? You double down, you harden your own heart. I mean, I think that there's a lot of relatability in that. So it's where I started with the Parsha. How about you guys? What do you got?
So I granted myself permission to talk about something actually from last week's Parsha because we didn't record, and it really caught my attention. So I wanted to share it with you because I want to think about it more. In last week's Parsha, right after Moshe takes his family back to Egypt with him, God tells him again that he has to go to Pharaoh. And God says to him, this is what I want you to say to Pharaoh after you show off all the cool stuff you can do by, giving yourself tzara and then making it go away and throwing your rod and making it a snake and then making it a rod again. And anyway, so after Moshe has demonstrated that he is God's messenger, God tells him to say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn, B'ni Bechori Yisrael. I have said to you, let my son go, that he may worship me. Yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son. So even before any of the plagues, right? So God has already said to Moses, I am going to harden Pharaoh's heart, to pick up on what Matthew was talking about. But God warns Pharaoh in advance, I'm going to end up slaying your firstborns. And I think that gets lost in all the chapters before that actually happens in the narrative. And I want to point out that this sort of follows the halachic principle, but also there's a literary principle here that Pharaoh has been warned, right? God doesn't punish and kill people without giving them proper warning. So this functions as that warning. And there's also some symmetry here, because if Israel is God's firstborn that Pharaoh has enslaved, then when God punishes Egypt's firstborns, there's a nation to nation firstborn parallelism there that I didn't realize until I read about it. I also want to flag that this later becomes part of the anti-Jewish trope in Christian biblical interpretation about the angry God of the Old Testament, who is contrasted with the warm, fuzzy, loving God of the New Testament. And one last quick thing, Rashi comments on this phrase that this is where God makes Esav's sale of the birthright to Jacob official. That when God identifies Jacob as his firstborn, he is saying that sale that happened back in Genesis 25, sharir v'kayam, it is valid and it is standing and I endorse it, and Israel is my firstborn. And this is significant because in later Jewish and Christian biblical interpretation, there's competition to identify as Jacob Israel, as God's chosen. So Jews obviously identify themselves as Jacob Israel, and they identify Esav with Christianity and Rome. And so when Rashi points out that God says that this is a valid sale, he is signaling that God's relationship with Israel endures. And I think that's a pro-Jewish claim. I don't think it's an anti-Christian claim, but that is a subject for another time.
I'm going to take something you mentioned, which does also relate to last week, but shows up in this week's Parsha as well. And I want to ponder it for a second. You talked about Moshe being told last week the various symbols and showing some of them. But again, this week in this week's portion, the example that's in this week's portion, along with all of the plagues, which are going to relate also in some way to what I've been thinking about, is that he takes his staff and he throws it to the ground, right? And it turns into a snake. And then the Egyptian sorcerers do the same thing, and then the Aaron's staff goes and eats up all the other snakes, and then that's supposed to be these symbols from God. Now, I always wondered why they had magic then and we don't have magic now. If they knew incantations and they were not godly, people of our God, and they have gone away, so they clearly had something, and what made them able to do it, and we've lost that information, and we've lost that ability to do it. It never really made sense to me, and it always bothered me. And a couple of years ago, and I'm probably sharing this in the most public setting that I ever have on today's show, I have come to believe, although I cannot really prove it, but I've spoken to people about this, and they think that it's entirely plausible that neither side, neither Moshe and Aaron nor the sorcerers of Egypt actually were doing any real magic that was like a miracle, that was miraculous. It was all illusions. It's illusions all the way back from Penn and Teller now, all the way back to ancient Egypt. In fact, the first recorded magic trick, right, with an effect is from ancient Egypt, where we have a description of how you can make a chicken die by like but you're hiding the head behind your finger, and then you can magically make it like come back to life. And I think that God just showed Moshe how to do a really cool magic trick and said, this is what you're going to do to like inspire them. And your knowledge of magic and illusions is going to be better than theirs. And people are going to get inspired by that. And people get inspired now by rhetoric and by great sermons and speeches and films. And we don't think twice about that. And I think that throughout history, whatever we see as quote unquote magic tricks, as like magic from heaven, are just illusions. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with thinking that. I don't think it takes away from my belief in God. I think that God can inspire somebody and give them the same way that God gives prophets words to say that are really meaningful and can convert people into doing the right thing. I think God gives people the ability to have a visual illusion that wows people and says, hey, I'm more inspiring than other people. That's my theory. I'd love to hear pushback from listeners, from you guys. Tell me what you guys think.
But just the wonders, right? Like just those signs and wonder, like the plagues.
As opposed to what? So the plagues, I mean,
like,
you have to start
the
asking
water
yourself,
actually
like,
turn to blood? Like,
I don't know.
Where
Maybe
do you draw your line?
So my line would be, and this is very Maimonidean, where like, well, if, some people would say, well, they knew that algae blooms at a certain point in time and it makes the Nile possibly look red. Hold on. I know Yedida's giving me a thumbs up. I'm not going... But what I'm trying to get at is that it's still a miracle to know when that's going to happen and to like predict it and to say tomorrow this is going to happen, and that the natural phenomenon happens at the right time. And this is very Maimonidean, I believe, my reading of Maimonides. The miracle is that your natural phenomenon happens at the time when you need it the most. That's God telling you that's a miracle.
Were there frogs?
I'm less as concerned with the plagues. I'll be honest.
My backup Dvar Torah for today was of the Midrash about the frogs, right? So it says Tzfardea, which is a singular, except that like there have to be frogs in your beds and frogs on your heads and frogs in your oven. So the Midrash says that like there was one giant frog and they like poked it, and like more frogs came out, and they would poke it again, and like more frogs popped out. And so there were like bajillions of little frogs coming out of this like giant frog. Anyway, I love that. I love that. And like, sorry, Avi, it doesn't match
Midrash,
your...
huh?
Yeah. No, it doesn't. And I'm fine. Like I said, I am less concerned, and this is not fully fleshed out. This is not an academic paper, but I've asked magicians, for example, could somebody who is really good at, magic, the way that we understand it today, take a stick and turn it and throw it in the ground and turn it into a snake, and then vice versa, and like reverse that? And they're like, yeah, there are magicians that can do lots of tricks like that. Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kauffman. Michael Fraiman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.